My first information on ISHA was given or lady that a colleague, a bit older colleague of mine, approached me or a group of students in our student cafeteria downstairs in the Faculty of Philosophy, where I was studying at the time, where I work today. It turned out that I was the only one flying to the 4th ISHA conference in Utrecht in the Netherlands. Croatia was still a society full of problems. It's still full of problems, but at that time it was 1/3 under occupation, and life was always a little bit different when you have a war and men in uniforms around. So I know that I was thinking or trying the way how to organize that trip, in a sense that you needed money for the plane ticket. And so I also had one unpleasant experience with, at that time, head of the department, because I have provided a book which should be in the library of the university in Utrecht, still in English, on the Croatian art and culture, historical overview. Because at that time, I guess, I thought that it was very necessary and part of the duty to show, you know, the country I'm coming from and stuff that was connected with Croatia. I didn't get. My department had to sign that book. It was signed by me and it was presented by me to the University of Utrecht. But that's now irrelevant. Maybe more connected with various situation in Croatia than ISHA. The conference, the first one, and one of many I've attended as part of ISHA, was revealing in several different ways. First of all, I think that the very experience of traveling was essential. ISHA, not only the conference, but the fact that I eventually finished as a member of the international board, and that I was working for ISHA in Leuven in Belgium, where the headquarters of the association at that time was, definitely determined my life in many different ways. There were two events that are partially connected with ISHA that have changed my life, I would say, definitely professional life. One was when I went to study in the United States. The other one was my year spent in Belgium, which came thanks and because of ISHA. But both are connecting the experience ISHA has. You travel, you see other countries, you see other colleagues. Not only that you learn from people who are studying at different universities, which is also what's happening, but you also see what kind of people there are. You also can see and say, hey, you know, these are obviously very smart, or these are less interested in academia and more interested in partying and this and that. So you see different people, and that was an enormously enriching experience for me in many different ways. It started with Utrecht. Upon my return to Croatia, I have organized the first ISHA section in Croatia, and Zagreb was the first, and after Zagreb others followed. And we were very proud that a couple of years after that we had the first ISHA seminar already organized in Croatia, and then the conference and all those things that followed after I already ceased to be a student and I started to work at the university in Zagreb. But I remained connected, especially with the first generation of ISHA students, helping them to organize, maybe negotiating a little bit with the department and so on. So in that sense, ISHA was something that was enriching, I would say, everyone who was coming. It was also interesting to see what type of people historians are, because when you study in only at one university, you maybe can get different or wrong or not always the most precise view of what historians are, what kind of historical schools are, who's more fun to listen. I would say that historians coming from the continent always should pay more attention to the way how they retell their story, how they explain their historiography, and so on. So I simply cannot think of anything negative that we have created. It became popular in Croatia, and relatively strong and enduring association, which is not always the case, or which is actually, I would say, very rarely the case, taking into account especially societies with not very long traditions as Croatian society is. After my experience as the academic coordinator of ISHA activities, there were 3 of us, a colleague of mine, Christina Zoma, she is now working for the diplomatic service in Austria. Her predecessor from Austria, who was also president of ISHA, I met him recently in Belgrade, where he served in Austrian embassy in Belgrade. He came to a lecture I gave in Belgrade a couple of years ago, 2 years ago. The other one was a Belgian guy who was Mike, who was in charge of the finances, and the academic coordinator was me. We have rented an office, which was also a house where Mike and I were living. Christina was 1 street further. And I cannot say that there were no tensions at that time, but we managed to get money from European funds and organized or helped ISHA Leuven to organize a couple of things. Our assembly or the central meeting was in Wrocław that year, many years ago. I think that the opportunity for me personally to go and study in Belgium for my master's thesis was of enormous professional importance, and I still feel the consequences of that because I managed to get MA much quicker than most of my colleagues I studied with in Croatia. Problems of ISHA are probably still there, because some of them you cannot solve. We personally had always problems with students less interested in the academical part and more interested into traveling. So ISHA as a travel agency, ISHA as a reason to go somewhere. Being a bit older, especially now, looking at the time when many of the societies or many of the countries around Europe, or people from different countries around Europe, were not able to travel. Some of our colleagues, like one of our predecessors in the ISHA International, was coming from Ukraine. It was enormously hard for him to obtain a visa to study and live in Belgium for a year, for instance. So for people like him, and for many people coming from less fortunate countries of Europe, that was of enormous benefit, even if it was only just, a travel agency. If it was not more than a possibility to go somewhere and to sleep for a little money and to visit. But in spite of that, and I think that part should be stressed. Another part is the eagerness to volunteer, to do something. I was volunteering for ISHA, although I was able to study at the time in Belgium, which probably wouldn't happen without ISHA. But to volunteer, to be together, to try to do something, to make sense of a discipline which is not always probably something people would enroll, very many people would enroll. What is good with people being together in different ISHA branches is to give another meaning to the stuff we do, the material we study, to the sources which are somewhere in the archives. You do something, you feel that there is a deeper meaning, and meaning for the modern man, and not only for the students. You know, you do something, you organize, you talk about stuff that is of interest. Was it, as I could remember, some of the things we did on man and nature, on borders, and things. Then you talk with people from different countries. You discover words that are, you know, in English, and you listen to the Italian English from your Italian colleagues, and German English from someone coming from Germany. That was hugely important, I would say, if you know what to do with that. And in that sense, stuff that I was critical about, and I'm normally rather critical, you have to understand that there are different schools, that schools are of different quality, that people are of different interest, that many of our colleagues, which was not a norm when I was a student, you know, students in Croatia who would enroll history would do something as historians. That was the idea. Now it's less so. At that time, many of my colleagues that were studying in Belgium were not thinking of the career or to have a career in history, and for me that was hard to understand. It helped me later to understand Croatian society in 2020 better than probably some of my colleagues. So in many different ways, ISHA experience, even when there were some bad or not so sophisticated things happening, it helped me in many different ways. And that would be my message to all those who want to travel, because it takes some effort, who want to present something, because it also takes an effort even to embarrass yourself. Although it's better not to embarrass yourself, but to be interesting, to publish. You know, those were some of the first articles I was able to publish in English, and some of the first articles then that I expanded and published in Croatian were published thanks to ISHA. So I could think of many different ways. Of course, not everyone should seize all the opportunities. You know, some people will find a husband. That happened to a friend of mine from Slovakia. She met a German guy from Bremen, and she moved from Martin to Bremen, and I don't know, they're probably still together. I'm still in touch with my Belgian friends until today. None of them works in history, but I follow them on Facebook, and we are still connected. That's what ISHA can give to everyone.